Hello, my name's Jethro, and the night before my wedding, my parents sent me a text that said, "Don't expect us. You're not our priority." I remember staring at those words until they blurred, wondering how love could sound so clean, so deliberate, so final. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the erased one. But here's the thing, when someone erases you long enough, you start learning how to rewrite yourself. So, I left them a note. Not to beg, not to explain, just to remind them what silence sounds like when it finally speaks back. Would you have done the same? It was early April in Charleston, the kind of spring day that looked too perfect to be real. The air smelled like blooming magnolia trees, and the sunlight made everything feel softer than it really was. I remember standing on my porch, holding a stack of ivory envelopes, each one hand-lettered with the names of people I loved, or at least used to love. My wedding invitations. My heart beat fast with a nervous, steady rhythm. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter, hope mixed with disbelief that maybe, finally, my life was moving towards something that belonged to me. I had picked the date carefully, the first Saturday in May. It felt symbolic somehow. New beginnings, clean air, the promise of things growing again. Arden and I had spent nights choosing every detail together, the flowers, the band, the vows. We weren't flashy people, and the wedding wasn't meant to impress anyone. Still, I wanted my parents there. I wanted them to see me, to look at me and say, "You did good, Jethro." That thought alone made my throat tighten. After I dropped the invitations at the post office, I lingered a moment by the counter, tracing the edge of the receipt. I almost texted my mom, "Did you get it yet?" But stopped myself. I'd sent her the save the date months ago. She hadn't replied then either. I told myself she was busy. I told myself all sorts of stories, the same ones I'd been telling since I was 10, and learned that silence was my family's preferred language. 3 days later, my cousin Lacey called while I was picking out table linens. "Hey, did you know Callista's throwing her engagement/celebration party?" she said, sounding hesitant. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was my reflex whenever the universe threw me a punch. "Good for her," I said. "Yeah, it's just, her event's on May 6th. I stopped mid-step. "You mean my wedding date?" Lacey sighed. "Yeah, I thought you'd know. Everyone's talking about it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The florist's voice faded in the background. I pressed my phone tighter to my ear, trying to process it. Callista, my older sister, the golden one, the family's PR darling, had chosen my wedding day for her own party. And not just any party, but an engagement/celebration. She wasn't even engaged yet. "That must be a mistake," I said finally, my voice thin. "Maybe," Lacey murmured. "But the invitations went out yesterday." I hung up, thanked the florist in a voice that didn't sound like mine, and walked outside into the Charleston humidity. My heart felt like it had tripped over itself. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. I wanted to believe she hadn't done it to hurt me. But the thing about people like Callista is, they don't have to try to hurt you. They just exist, and somehow, it happens anyway. That night, I told Arden. He listened, patient as always, his hand tracing small circles on my arm. "Maybe she didn't mean it," he said softly. "She did," I whispered. "And Mom and Dad won't say a thing. They'll go to hers, of course. They always do." He looked at me for a long time before saying, "Then we'll get married anyway, with or without them." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah," I said. With or without them. A week later, I was at my final dress fitting, the air in the bridal studio thick with the scent of fabric and perfume. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me, too still, too careful. The seamstress fussed with the hem, talking about lace and stitching. I wasn't really listening. My phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up with a message from Mom and Dad. I reached for it, a spark of hope flickering despite everything. Maybe it was a congratulations. Maybe an apology. I unlocked the screen. The text read, "Don't expect us. You're not our priority that day." My vision tunneled. The room seemed to shrink around me. For a long moment, I just stared at the words, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something else, something kinder, something less final. But they didn't. I excused myself, muttering something about needing a moment, and locked myself in the restroom. The tile was cold beneath my feet. I sank down against the door, holding the phone like it was burning. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wasn't crying. Not yet. It was something colder than sadness, a realization that felt like a closing door. They'd chosen her again, and this time, they hadn't even bothered to pretend otherwise. I remembered being 7, watching Callista get crowned homecoming queen, while Mom whispered to Dad, "She's our pride." I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, my science fair ribbons still crumpled in my hand, listening to them plan her college visit. I remembered every time I'd been told I was too sensitive, every apology I'd swallowed because it wasn't worth starting a fight. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, eyes dull, makeup smudged, and for the first time I saw exactly what they saw. The extra one. The daughter you forget to mention. The seamstress knocked gently. "Everything okay, hun?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "Everything's fine." When I walked out, I thanked her, paid the deposit, and stepped into the fading sunlight. The street was quiet. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car, and before starting the engine, I deleted the text. I didn't want to look at it anymore, but deleting it didn't erase the words. They stayed burned behind my eyes. By the time I reached Sullivan's Island, the sun was low, the sky painted in streaks of coral and lavender. It was the place I always went when I needed to think, where the ocean sounded like breathing. I sat on the sand, pulling my knees close, watching the waves roll in and fade. I thought about calling Arden, then didn't. What could I even say? That I wasn't surprised. That maybe I'd known all along. My phone buzzed again. This time it was him. "You okay?" I typed back. "I'm fine." Then erased it. Then typed it again. He called. I let it ring out. The truth was, I wasn't fine. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped the center out of me and left only a shell that looked calm enough to pass for normal. I stayed until the sky turned black and the stars came out, tiny and indifferent. When I finally stood, brushing the sand from my dress, I whispered to no one. They had chosen her again. And this time, I wouldn't pretend it didn't hurt. The drive home from the beach was silent. No music, no podcasts, no phone calls, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of moss-laced trees lining the road back to Charleston. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I didn't want to fill it. I just wanted to sit with it. By the time I pulled into our little townhouse, the street was asleep. Porch lights flickered, and the air smelled faintly of salt. Arden was on the couch, curled beneath a throw blanket, phone dim on the cushion beside him. I stood in the doorway a while, watching him breathe. It should have felt comforting, his presence, the soft light of home, but I still felt like I was made of glass, transparent, fragile, one wrong move from shattering. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and sat alone. Moonlight slanted through the blinds, painting silver stripes across the counter. My phone lay beside me, face down, but I didn't need to see the message again. I could feel the weight of it. "You're not our priority." Those 4 words cracked open something old and aching inside me. It brought me back. 2 years ago, Valora's birthday. I hadn't been invited. The memory had dust on it, but it was still sharp. I found out from Facebook, a photo of the estate in Savannah, my parents flanking Valora while Callista kissed her cheek, glasses raised, everyone glowing, except me. I'd stared at that picture until my coffee turned cold. No invitation, no message, no explanation. I even checked my spam folder, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. Later, when I asked Mom about it, carefully, casually, she smiled and said, "Oh, honey, it was just a spontaneous thing. We didn't think you'd want to come all that way." Her voice syrupy, like she was doing me a favor. Dad had just patted my hand and said, "Next time, sweetheart." But there was never a next time. That night in the kitchen, the memory played in my head on repeat. Not an accident then. Not an accident now. The next morning, sunlight filtered through our blinds, warm and deceptive. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But the phone still sat on the nightstand, screen black, heavy with silence. I got up, brushed my teeth, fed the dog, made coffee, all the motions of a normal day. But nothing about it felt normal. While the coffee brewed, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. The first post on my feed was Callista's. "Our family wedding," the caption read. The photo looked like something from a bridal magazine. White roses, candlelight, coordinated outfits. My parents stood in the center, beaming, holding her hand like she was royalty. Everyone was tagged. Except me. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the comments. "So beautiful! You all look amazing! What a perfect family!" I couldn't stop staring. I'd seen a lot of things over the years, but this was erasure, done with precision, pixel by pixel. Arden walked in, groggy, hair tousled. And he kissed the top of my head. "You're up early." I showed him the screen. He squinted, then frowned. "They posted this last night?" "Yeah." His jaw clenched. "You're not even tagged." "I know." He exhaled, slow and deep. "Why do you still look, Jeth?" I hesitated. "Because part of me keeps hoping they'll remember I'm not just the backup." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he gently took the phone, placed it face down on the counter, and said, "You can't heal in the place that keeps reopening the wound." I nodded, but inside, I knew. I wasn't ready to heal. Not yet. Not while the cut was still fresh. After he left for work, I stayed seated at the table, staring at the phone. The image burned into my memory. Callista's gown. Dad's silver watch. Mom's pearls. Everything perfect. Everything without me. I pulled an old journal from the bookshelf. The cover was worn. The pages smelled like dust. I hadn't written in it in years. But now, the words came fast, unstoppable. I didn't write for them. I wrote for me. I listed every birthday missed, every event skipped, every family dinner I found out about after the photos were posted. My hand cramped, but I kept writing. By noon, the sky outside had darkened, storm clouds rolling in. I opened the window, letting the warm, damp air in. Thunder echoed in the distance. On the fridge, the wedding invitation hung beneath a seashell magnet. May 6th. It felt small now, like a band-aid over a bullet wound. I had planned the wedding like it could repair years of damage, but it couldn't. It never could. Later that evening, Arden came home with groceries and a bouquet of white tulips. He placed them gently on the counter. "You're too quiet," he said. "I'm fine," I replied, the way I always did. He gave me a look, one that said he knew better. "You don't have to be." I smiled, barely. "Maybe not today." After dinner, I took a walk. The rain had stopped. The streets were slick and glowing under streetlights. I passed places from our childhood, Callista's favorite bakery, the park where we posed for holiday cards, the church where she sang while I sat quietly, invisible beside her. But tonight, I didn't flinch. I walked past each shadow like I was shedding something. When I returned home, I opened my journal again. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one sentence, bold and final. "This wedding won't be about them anymore." I closed the book and sat back. No more scrolling, no more waiting. They had seen me, and they chose not to. I barely slept that night. The rain tapping on the window seemed louder than usual, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The streetlight outside flickered behind the blinds, casting a broken glow across the ceiling. I stared at that ceiling for hours, my journal lying open beside me. The last sentence I'd written looped in my head. "This wedding won't be about them anymore." It had felt like a declaration when I wrote it. Now it sounded like a dare I wasn't sure I could keep. Morning came heavy and damp, as Charleston mornings tend to be, air thick like syrup, pressing against your skin. I made coffee, though it tasted like nothing. My apartment still smelled faintly of the lilies Arden brought home yesterday, their sweetness clashing with the dull ache in my chest. Tomorrow was my wedding day. I should have felt joy, nerves, butterflies. anything but this. Instead, it felt like I was bracing for a storm I'd spent years watching gather on the horizon. Mid-morning, I busied myself with reception details, napkins, table cards, centerpieces, anything to keep my hands moving and my thoughts still. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. I hesitated, then opened it. It was just a photo. A wedding cake. Grand and pristine, towering with white tears, intricate sugar flowers, and gold embellishments. Below it, a single line. Wasn't this just perfect? No greeting. No thinking of you. No mention of my wedding. It was Callista's cake. Her design, her style, her name written in elegant frosting for everyone to see. I stared at the screen, hoping I'd misread something. But there it was. Mom. Jethro. Not a mistake. She'd meant to send it to me. She wanted me to see it. The pain wasn't in the picture. It was in the ease with which she sent it, like I was a distant acquaintance rather than her daughter, like I was just another number in her phone. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Looks great, Mom. Thanks for reminding me that my sister's cake still means more than my entire day. I turned the phone face down and walked to the window. Across the street, a young couple was loading boxes into a moving truck, laughing, teasing each other about something small and forgettable. I wondered if they had parents who showed up. The hours passed in fragments. I folded place cards, confirmed the caterer, arranged candles. Outwardly, I looked like a bride preparing for her big day. Inside, I felt like I was dissolving. Around sunset, my phone buzzed again. Dad, this time. Sorry this didn't work out. We hope your day is nice anyway. No regret. No warmth. Just a sentence as cold as tile. Like he'd missed a neighbor's barbecue, not his daughter's wedding. I typed out a response. You were never coming, were you? But I didn't send it. I just stared at the blinking cursor until the screen faded to black. When Arden came home, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by ribbon and empty boxes. He knelt beside me and asked what happened. I handed him the phone without a word. He read the messages and let out a sigh. They really sent this? I nodded. You don't deserve that, he said quietly. I almost laughed. Maybe I do, for still expecting anything different. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, not to reject him, but to protect myself from falling apart. After he left to grab some last-minute things, I started laying out what I'd need tomorrow. My dress, my shoes, the veil. I moved like I was underwater, slow, deliberate, detached. At the bottom of the drawer, I found an old envelope, yellowed and worn. A birthday card. I knew the handwriting instantly, Mom's, but it wasn't addressed to me. The front read, "To our shining star." Inside, a heartfelt message to Callista in elegant cursive. You make us so proud. You light up every room you walk into. Below that, in Dad's bold scrawl, love you more than you'll ever know. My breath caught in my throat. But then I noticed something faint on the back of the card. Pencil marks, nearly erased. To Jethro. It had been mine once, or meant to be, until they gave it to her instead. That hurt worse than the texts. Not because they forgot me, because they rewrote me. Like I had been edited out of my own life, replaced without hesitation. I pressed the card to my chest, not from nostalgia, but to feel something real. Proof I hadn't imagined it all. That once, even for a moment, I was someone they cherished. But that was a different kind of love. A conditional kind. A performance dressed as affection. I opened my journal. This time, I didn't write about hurt. I wrote about patterns, about the way their apologies never carried weight, how their love was really a cycle. Me forgiving, them forgetting. Maybe they believed that was love, but I didn't. Not anymore. Later, as I sipped wine by the open window, the city murmured softly below. Somewhere, someone played jazz on a porch. The world kept turning. When Arden returned, he brought lavender and a quiet warmth. He placed the flowers down and asked, You ready for tomorrow? I surprised myself. I am. He smiled. You sure? Yes, I said, meaning every word. Because it's not about them anymore. He kissed my forehead and whispered, That's my girl. I watched him walk away to hang up his suit. Then I turned back to the window, my reflection staring back, calm, grounded. No longer the girl begging for scraps of love. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I didn't open it. I already knew. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd replaced me. When I closed my journal and slid it back onto the shelf, silence settled over the apartment like a heavy curtain. Arden folded his blazer with the same methodical care he gave everything in his life and stepped into the bedroom to change out of his work clothes. The hum of the air conditioning unit, the soft rustle of cotton and linen, and the faint chirping of cicadas outside the cracked window blended into a single, gentle rhythm that throbbed against my temples. I remained in the kitchen, leaning against the cool marble counter, flipping over a card I had found hours earlier in a forgotten drawer. It was addressed to Callista, but once it had been meant for me. The neat handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably my mother's. The card was floral and expensive, the kind she used to give me when I was the daughter who mattered. Now it felt like a ghost in my hands, a fragile echo of a love and recognition that had once belonged to me and had now been transferred, repackaged, and delivered to someone else. As if I'd died, and my memories had simply been reassigned to the more convenient daughter. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay beside Arden, who drifted off in the warm hush of midnight, and stared at the ceiling. I kept thinking about the lavender ribbon, the dusty blue accents, the tablescapes I had once obsessed over. A feeling pressed down on my chest like a weight I couldn't dislodge. At first light, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Arden. The streets of Charleston were still wrapped in a bluish hue, the sun barely peeking over the harbor. Dew clung to the sidewalks like a shiver. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't put on makeup. I just drove to the florist's workshop on East Bay Street, the same one I had dragged my mother and sister to 9 months earlier. The same one where I'd cried happy tears after choosing the bouquet that felt like home. The studio's large windows let in soft light, illuminating the workspace in golden rays. Inside, it smelled like heaven. Roses, eucalyptus, gardenias. There were vases everywhere, some half full with blooms, others empty but ready. Ribbons dangled from shelves, color-coded and immaculate. It was just as I remembered it, except now it felt like a crime scene. A woman I vaguely recognized stood behind the counter. She was younger than I recalled, or maybe she had just worn her hair differently back then. She smiled politely as she adjusted a centerpiece of ivory peonies and blue thistle. "You have exquisite taste," she said as I wandered in. Her voice was smooth, professional. "You've done a wonderful job replicating Callista's theme, but with more elegance, if I may say so." I froze. Her words hit like a slap. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my pulse had doubled. "Callista's theme," she repeated, gesturing toward the arrangement. "Dusty rose and lavender with silver sage greens. It's very popular now, but the way you've adjusted the balance, it's more elevated, less rustic, more refined." She tapped her tablet and rotated it toward me. My stomach turned. On the screen were screenshots of a Pinterest board, Callista's wedding vision. Every image felt like a photograph of my own heart. Table layouts, archways, bouquets, even the napkin rings. My napkin rings, the ones I had spent hours debating with Arden over, ultimately settling on brushed gold because my mother said silver felt too cold. I felt cold now. These are hers?" I asked quietly. "Oh yes," the florist replied. "She was very thorough. She said she was inspired by a wedding she'd helped plan for someone else. A family member, I believe?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I simply stared at the screen while the blood drained from my face. They hadn't just stolen color schemes or decor. They'd stolen the narrative. The small, deeply personal details I had once whispered to my mother and sister over coffee, over wine, over tears. The notes I had emailed, the mood boards, the private files I had trusted only to family. And now they were hers. "I only arrange what I'm shown," the florist added softly, sensing the shift in my expression. "I ask little questions." "I'm sure you do," I murmured, my voice dry. I left without saying goodbye. The sun was high now, baking the pavement, but I felt numb. I drove past the venue Callista had chosen. Ironically, the same estate I had once dreamed of, but had decided was too extravagant. Its white columns now gleamed in the morning light. On its Instagram page, promotional photos were already up. A pale blue aisle runner, floral arches identical to the ones I had drawn in my sketchbook, and a string quartet that I had once considered hiring for my ceremony. I parked across the street and sat in silence. It wasn't just mimicry, it was erasure. She hadn't borrowed my ideas, she had absorbed them completely. She had taken the vision I'd carried in my chest and repackaged it under her name like it had never belonged to anyone else. They had stripped my fingerprints off the story and claimed authorship. When I returned home that night, I began gathering what I had left from that stolen chapter. My wedding shoes, the bracelet Arden had given me when we first got engaged, my notes, my printed color swatches. They had become artifacts of a life interrupted, a plan discarded. As I opened a keepsake box, the birthday card fell out again, the one addressed to Callista. I flipped it over absent-mindedly and froze. On the back, in faint pencil, were the words, "To Jethro." Jethro, my childhood nickname, the one my dad had given me before my voice changed and my dreams got too big for their comfort. I pressed the card against my heart. For one fleeting moment, I had belonged, I had mattered. And now, not only had I been cut out of the picture, I had been photoshopped from the frame entirely. Arden returned from his meeting, unbuttoning his collar, and caught sight of me sitting on the edge of the bed. "You okay?" he asked softly. I lifted the card for him to see. "They didn't just steal a date," I said, voice trembling. "They stole the story. My story." He crossed the room and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Then let's write a new one." I looked at him, really looked. His presence was the only truth I trusted now. And with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks, I knew what I had to do. "I want to write a letter," I said. He raised a brow. "To your parents?" I shook my head. "No. To everyone." This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. It was about drawing a line between who I had been, who they had tried to erase, and who I would become beyond their reach. If they wanted to pretend I never existed, then I would show them, painfully, permanently, what that really looked like. As the hours slipped past, the living room dimmed into shadows. Arden and I said little. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighty, intentional, like the hush that settles before a storm or a vow. He stood by the tall window, adjusting his cufflinks with the meticulous grace he carried into every room. I sat cross-legged on the floor, binder open in front of me, the letter freshly folded, its edges still warm from my hands. Somewhere beyond the glass, a church bell began to toll. 1, 2, all the way to 11. Each chime pulsed through me, a rhythm of time moving forward while parts of me stayed suspended in memories I never chose to keep. The air was thick with the unsaid. My thoughts flickered between past and future, between what was taken from me and what I had begun to reclaim. Then Arden crossed the room, and without saying a word, knelt in front of me. He reached for my hand, held it with a gentle steadiness. I looked into his eyes, kind, clear, unflinching. "You are enough," he said softly. "You don't need to prove anything to them." No music swelled, no cinematic spark flared, but something in me loosened. The sentence didn't fall like a hammer, it melted like ice around an aching truth. I didn't cry, I didn't collapse. I just nodded, slow and sure, as if accepting something I'd resisted for years. That maybe I was never the one who failed. That maybe their silence, their absence, wasn't my fault. That maybe surviving didn't need to come with shame. The next evening, twilight stretched long and low across Sullivan's Island, casting everything in hues of gold and mauve. The beach was nearly empty. I walked along the shoreline, my bare feet sinking slightly into the cool, damp sand, each step anchoring me to the present. My wedding dress clung to my frame, half unzipped, its train fluttering like a forgotten banner in the wind. Behind me, Arden followed, not to hover, not to intrude, but to bear witness. I paused as a wave rolled in, brushing over my toes before retreating. The air tasted of salt and something old, like memory itself. I stared at the horizon, where the sea met sky in a blur of lavender and steel. "I marry a man worth loving tomorrow," I said, my voice barely louder than the surf. "But tonight, I remind myself I don't need their permission to exist." Arden said nothing. He just stepped beside me, his presence quiet and full. In his silence, there was no pressure, only space. And in that space, I found something like peace. I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me, untangling strands of grief still knotted in my chest. Maybe the world would forgive them before I ever did. But that was no longer mine to carry. Pain had taught me boundaries, had carved them into my skin like shoreline cliffs. And tomorrow, I would walk past them into a new chapter. Later, back in our rented home, I poured a glass of red wine and settled into the corner of the couch. The binder rested on my lap, heavy, not with pages, but with truths long suppressed. Classical music played from the speaker, the piano notes soft and forgiving. I opened my journal and began to write. Not to justify, not to accuse, but to speak clearly. To unearth the things they refused to see. The letter unfolded like a map of scars. To the sister who never asked why I was silent, I began. To the mother who made me watch from the sidelines. To the father who didn't choose, but never protected. I paused, let the ache breathe. I forgive the girl who waited in the dark, I continued. I honor the woman rising toward light. My handwriting slowed with the final lines. There was no plea for reconciliation, no dramatic flourish. Just facts and feelings laid bare, and a simple message written across the cover when I was done. Read only if you dare. I tucked the letter beside my speech. I didn't plan to hand it to them. I didn't even know if they'd ever read it. But if they wanted to understand me, if they ever tried, this would be their chance. That night, Arden's family gathered for the rehearsal dinner. The courtyard glowed with fairy lights strung through olive trees. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the scent of grilled rosemary chicken and baked bread. His aunts kissed my cheeks like I'd always belonged. His cousins pulled out chairs and filled my glass without asking, and Arden's mother, elegant and grounded, slipped her hand under mine and whispered, "We've waited to celebrate you. No social media posts, no veiled comparisons, just warmth." A toast was raised. Someone joked, "She's one of us now." And for the first time that week, I laughed, not out of politeness, but because it was real. Later, I wandered to the edge of the property. There, under a sprawling oak, I pulled out the binder again and rested my hand on the cover. The weight that once felt suffocating now felt different, like something I could carry with pride. My phone buzzed. Arden's name lit up the screen. "I love you, tonight always." I replied, "I love this life we're building." Tomorrow, I'd wear a ring, not to bind myself to anyone's approval, but to mark the start of something built on truth, not silence, not shame. And maybe, just maybe, not being theirs anymore was the best thing that ever happened to me. When the morning light crept through the curtains, it landed softly on the edge of my notebook, the same one I'd closed under the oak tree the night before. The air in the room felt still, almost reverent, like the pause between a held breath and the words that would finally follow it. Arden was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen. I could smell the faint aroma of coffee and toast, the familiar rhythm of his morning humming. My wedding day had arrived. I should have felt the weight of joy, the anticipation that most brides describe with nervous laughter and champagne. But instead, I felt composed, not cold, but calm in a way I hadn't known before, like the eye of a storm that had finally reached its center. He brought me a mug, set it down beside the bed, and smiled. "You'll want to see this." He handed me his laptop. I frowned at first, thinking it might be something trivial, maybe another message from a vendor or a last-minute schedule change. But then I saw the headline. "Yeah, correction. Sources confirm Callista Novan's wedding design was not her own." My breath hitched. I clicked the article open. It was from the Southern Wedding Journal, the same blog that had praised her creative brilliance and visionary style just weeks ago. Now, the retraction ran like a scar across the screen. It has come to our attention that several design elements credited to Callista Novan were, in fact, based on copyrighted concepts belonging to another designer. We apologize for the earlier misrepresentation. The article didn't name me outright, but it didn't have to. The comments below told the story. Didn't her sister post something similar months before? Wow, stealing a wedding concept from your own family? That's low. So much for the perfect daughter. I scrolled further, the words blurring slightly. There was vindication, yes, but it didn't taste as sweet as I'd once imagined. Arden sat beside me, watching my expression. You okay? I let out a long, quiet breath. It's strange. I thought I'd feel lighter, but all I feel is tired. He nodded. That's because you never wanted revenge, Jethro. You just wanted peace. Peace. The word sat heavily between us. Maybe he was right. Maybe all I'd ever wanted was for the truth to speak for itself. Still, as I looked at that screen, at the apology that would live in digital permanence, I couldn't help thinking, sometimes silence protects lies, but sometimes it exposes them. The rest of the morning unfolded in slow, deliberate motions. My hairdresser arrived. The photographer set up soft lighting in the living room. Arden moved about with quiet efficiency, greeting vendors and double-checking details. I slipped into the small guest room that overlooked the garden, needing a moment alone before the whirlwind began. That's when I heard a knock. "Delivery for Ms. Novan," a voice called from the hall. I opened the door to find a courier holding a small white envelope, familiar handwriting scrawled across the front. My heart clenched before I even took it. "Sign here, please," he said politely. Once he left, I closed the door and stood there, staring at the return address. My parents' house. My fingers trembled slightly as I tore the envelope open. Inside was my own wedding invitation, the one I had mailed to them 6 weeks ago. No note, no explanation, no signature, just the same invitation, unbent, unstained, untouched. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the envelope resting in my lap like a piece of evidence. My stomach tightened, but the tears never came. I'd already wept for their absence. This was beyond pain. This was their silence, sharpened into a blade. I rose, walked into the living room, and placed the envelope on the fireplace mantel. Not to destroy it, but to mark it, a monument to what I'd survived. When Arden walked in a few minutes later, he paused. "What's that?" "An empty answer," I said softly. "I'm keeping it there to remind myself that silence isn't peace, it's permission. And I won't give it anymore." He didn't speak. He just crossed the room, wrapped his arms around me, and pressed his forehead against mine. "You're stronger than they ever wanted you to be." I smiled faintly. That's what scares them most. By the time evening came, the air outside had shifted, the kind of stillness that hints at a coming storm, but never quite delivers it. The decorations at the venue glowed softly in the sunset, and for a moment, everything looked picture-perfect, but I knew better than to mistake pretty for peaceful. I walked into the preparation room, still holding my binder, the same one with the letter folded inside. My videographer, Mel, was checking her camera angles. "Mel," I said, "I need to change something." She looked up, curious. "Change what?" "The slideshow," I said firmly. "Take it out. No family dedications, no parent segment. Just skip that part." She blinked. "Are you sure? It's kind of a tradition." "I'm sure." I smiled, steady but calm. If they erased me from their story, then I'll erase them from mine. But not out of hate, out of balance. Mel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Got it. I'll adjust the sequence." When she turned back to her camera, I felt a quiet satisfaction rise in me. Not triumph, but alignment. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Later, as the sky darkened and the string lights flickered on, I found a corner of the patio where I could breathe in the evening air. Laughter floated from inside. The kind that felt full and genuine, not the brittle kind my family specialized in. Arden approached, his tie slightly askew, his smile easy. They said the sunset's perfect out there. You should come look. I joined him outside, the colors painting everything in soft gold and coral. You know, I said quietly, it feels strange to start a new life without the people who gave me my first one. He slipped his hand into mine. Maybe that's the point, though. You're giving yourself the one they couldn't. I looked at him then, really looked, and realized how different this was from anything I'd ever known. His love didn't demand a performance. It didn't come with conditions or comparisons. It just existed. Steady, constant, honest. As we stood there, guests started arriving, their voices mixing with the sound of the waves. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something new. Readiness. If they weren't going to show up for my wedding, I'd make sure they were the only ones who missed it. The music from the ceremony still echoed faintly in my head as the sun dipped lower over the Charleston waterfront. The tide shimmered like molten glass, catching every hue of gold and rose from the sky. Guests drifted from table to table under the canopy of string lights, laughter mingling with the clink of glasses and the murmur of soft jazz. Everything looked beautiful, peaceful, complete. But inside me, something was humming quietly, a steady pulse that had nothing to do with nerves. It was purpose. Arden stood at the head table, talking to our friends from Atlanta. When his eyes caught mine across the crowd, he smiled, and that small gesture steadied me more than any deep breath ever could. Dinner was served. Toasts began. People raised glasses and laughed at stories of us, how we met at a book signing, how I once pretended to like hiking to impress him, how he proposed in the rain, and I said yes with mascara running down my cheeks. It all felt ordinary, familiar, and safe. Then it was Arden's turn. He tapped his glass, stood, and spoke with his usual grace, warm, sincere, but never performative. I've been lucky enough to love a woman who doesn't just survive hard things, she transforms them, he said, looking at me. Jethro taught me that silence can be strength, but that truth, when spoken with love, can heal more than it hurts. People clapped, some teary-eyed. He smiled and gestured for me to stand. My wife, he said softly, has something to say. That last sentence rippled through the tables. Chairs shifted. Cameras tilted. The air grew still enough to feel the weight of it. I rose, my fingers brushing the folded letter I'd tucked beside my plate. The paper was creased from being held too often. I didn't smooth it out, I just held it, small, imperfect, alive. The microphone felt cool in my hand. I looked around the tables, at faces glowing under the lanterns. My voice didn't shake when I said, I wrote something. It's not a toast, it's a letter. A murmur passed through the guests, but I continued before hesitation could find me. I began to read. To the ones who taught me how to disappear, I said quietly. The laughter that had lingered moments ago dissolved like sugar in water. I grew up believing that love had to be earned, that attention was a prize, that if I stayed quiet enough, good enough, invisible enough, someone might finally see me. A woman at one of the front tables lowered her fork slowly. I went on. I learned to applaud from the corners of rooms I wasn't invited into. I learned to smile in family photos that never made it to the frame. And when I spoke, I learned that silence was safer than asking why I wasn't enough. The paper in my hand fluttered slightly with the evening breeze, but I didn't lose my place. Tonight isn't about revenge or blame. It's about truth. Because for years, I thought my worth depended on how well I fit into a picture that was never meant for me. The crowd was utterly still now. Even the music had stopped. I glanced at Arden. His expression was calm, proud, unflinching. My family isn't here tonight, I continued. And that used to break my heart. But I've realized something. You can't lose people who were never holding you. You can't chase love that only existed when you were convenient. I saw a few people blink back tears. One man whispered something under his breath, something like, "Damn." I smiled faintly. To those who did show up, to my friends, to Arden's family, to anyone who ever made room for someone like me, thank you. You remind me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's chosen. I folded the paper halfway, my voice steady. Today, I marry a man who sees me, and I leave behind the ones who never tried. When I lowered the letter, no one moved. There was no clapping, no immediate sound. Just a silence thick enough to feel. Then, slowly, someone began to applaud, then another, and another. The sound grew, not thunderous, but reverent, honest. A few people were crying openly now. The videographer, I noticed, had her camera fixed on me, her hand trembling slightly as she focused. I set the microphone back onto its stand and walked toward Arden. He reached for my hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed it, not out of ceremony, but reverence. You did it, he whispered. I didn't, I said quietly. The truth did. Later, as the night deepened and the crowd drifted to the dance floor, I sat back for a moment, watching the scene unfold like a slow exhale after years of holding my breath. The air smelled of salt and lilacs. The lights twinkled on the water. Somewhere, laughter spilled from the bar, unguarded and bright. Across the room, people came up to me, friends, strangers, even the caterer, offering hugs, words like brave and beautiful, and I needed to hear that. But I didn't need their validation. The applause had already faded, but the quiet that followed felt like peace, not absence. Arden joined me at the table, setting down 2 glasses of champagne. You know, he said, grinning a little, that video is going to blow up. I chuckled softly. That's not why I read it. I know, he said. That's why it will. We sat in silence, clinking glasses gently. The sound was small, but it carried. I thought of the letter again, the one they'd never respond to, the one they'd pretend didn't exist. But maybe somewhere they'd see it. Maybe they'd hear my voice in it and finally understand that silence wasn't submission. It was strength waiting for the right moment to speak. The waves crashed softly beyond the dock, rhythmic and endless. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen, and while they weren't watching, the world finally saw me. I didn't sleep much that night, not from anxiety, but from the adrenaline that still echoed through my ribs like a second heartbeat. My speech from the wedding, the one I never thought I'd have the strength to deliver, kept replaying in my head. The words, the silences, the stunned faces, the quiet that had dropped over the room like snowfall before the first brave clap broke through. It hadn't been a performance. It had been a declaration. Even in my half-dreams, I kept returning to that silence, that moment when time felt suspended and the room held its breath. 1,000 things I could have said lived in the creases of the binder I'd held, unspoken but present. But I'd said enough. I'd said what needed to be heard. And somehow, for the first time in my life, I felt heard. By morning, the light that spilled through the blinds seemed softer, more forgiving, almost celebratory. Today wasn't just another Monday on the calendar. It was the beginning of something long overdue. I sat up in bed and stared at my reflection in the window pane. My chest didn't feel heavy. My hands weren't trembling. What I felt was simple, quiet certainty. Today, I would open the doors to the center I'd spent months building, the unspoken daughter. The name had come to me late one night, like a memory I hadn't lived but had always known. It was a title that didn't just tell my story. It echoed the experience of so many others, those erased not with cruelty, but with subtle, daily acts of exclusion. People like me. By mid-morning, I was walking down King Street beside Arden. The air buzzed with early fall warmth, golden leaves skittering across the sidewalks. The building stood ahead of us, a 2-story brick space restored with care. Its wide glass windows caught the sunlight like a promise. Above the doorway, the sign gleamed, the unspoken daughter. I felt a pulse go through me. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, but reality had more weight, more gravity. Arden offered his arm, not because I needed help walking, but because he knew sometimes you just want someone to stand beside you when the world starts watching. A crowd had already gathered outside. A few reporters milled near the curb, holding mics and cameras. Neighbors waved. Two therapists I'd worked with during our pilot phase smiled as I approached. One volunteer, a quiet woman named Elise, blinked back tears. I hadn't even stepped inside, and already the space was doing what it was meant to, holding emotion without shame. I took the scissors offered to me. The ribbon fluttered in the breeze like a heartbeat. I didn't give a speech. I just looked around, smiled, and cut. Click, flash, applause. When I stepped into the building, the air changed. It was quiet, not sterile. Soft colors lined the walls: sage, cream, warm sand. Artwork made by trauma survivors dotted the hallways. Rooms had been arranged with intention: therapy chairs that invited rest, shelves stocked with books and journals, quiet corners with soft blankets and tea. It was the opposite of clinical. It was human. The group followed me in. I turned, standing near the archway, heart steady. I hadn't prepared remarks. I didn't need to. "This place," I began, my voice strong but calm, "is for those of us who grew up trying to make ourselves smaller, for those who learned too early that speaking up meant being shut down. This is for the ones who were erased, not violently, but silently, who weren't forgotten, just never acknowledged." Heads nodded. Eyes welled. And when the applause came, it wasn't rehearsed. It was real. It filled the foyer like sunlight. That afternoon, the video went live. I hadn't posted it. Someone from the reception must have clipped it and uploaded it to TikTok. Just under 2 minutes, me standing in that wedding hall, binder in hand, words sharp but composed. The caption, "She's the real daughter." It spread like wildfire. By evening, it had crossed 5 million views, then 10, then 20. My inbox flooded. Emails from organizations, therapists, even producers. But it was the comments that struck me the most. My parents always introduced me as the quiet one. I was just never invited to speak. I'm 34 and still waiting to be seen by my mother. You gave words to something I've never been able to explain. Some messages were paragraphs long. Others were just one word: finally. I sat in the quiet of my new office, scrolling through the flood of recognition. I should have felt overwhelmed, but instead I felt still, like a lake just after dawn. My voice, once buried beneath years of dismissal, had become a signal flare for others like me. Then I noticed it, among the 100+ notifications, a single blank thread. The contact name lit up on my screen. Mom. Dad. No text. No subject. No message. Just presence. Or was it? And I stared at it. Once that would have ignited hope in me. I would have waited, refreshing, rereading, wondering. But now I hit delete. No ceremony, no drama, just delete. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. The hum of the building felt alive. I whispered aloud, "You don't get to be proud of me now." It wasn't cruel. It was truth. They chose silence when I screamed in silence for years. They stepped back when I needed someone to step in. And now, when the world had finally turned its gaze my way, they remained frozen. Spectators, not family. I thought of them, but it didn't ache the way it used to. It wasn't bitterness I felt. It was detachment. A clean, open space where longing used to live. For the first time, I didn't wish they'd show up. I didn't need them to understand. Because whether they did or didn't, I finally knew one thing with certainty. My story matters. And I was never invisible to myself again. The morning light spilled like watercolor across the dashboard as I pulled out of the driveway in Arden's car, heading east toward Savannah. The air was heavy with salt and late spring warmth, the kind that sticks to your skin like a memory. A soft breeze teased at the loose strands of my hair as the coastal road unraveled ahead of me, smooth and familiar. Though I hadn't driven it in years, I didn't look back. Not once. The rearview mirror reflected only sky and trees, no ghosts. There was nothing behind me that I needed to revisit. Nearly a year had passed since the wedding. A year since the speech that fractured the silence. Since the look on my parents' faces, the denial, the fear, the anger, morphed into a mirror of everything I'd spent my life burying. And now, here I was, on my way to speak again, but not in defiance, in declaration. I was scheduled to guest lecture at a small community center not far from my childhood town. The invitation came from someone who'd watched the video of my speech online and reached out. They called it Healing Stories, Finding Voice Through Trauma. I hesitated at first, unsure if returning to this place would be too sharp, too soon. But then I realized I wasn't returning to relive. I was returning to reclaim. As I drove past the shell of my old neighborhood, I saw the house I once called home. The paint had faded to a dull yellow, the shutters were boarded, and the porch swing hung still and empty. It looked hollow, like it had forgotten how to be loved. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That house had taken enough from me. The memories were already stitched into my skin, whispering their stories in my bones. The community center stood modestly across the street from a little church, with brick walls and ivy curling around the windows. A handmade banner fluttered in the breeze above the door. Healing Stories. There were daisies in the garden out front, my mother's favorite flower once, though I doubted she'd remember that now. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my blazer and smoothing the front of my skirt. My palms were damp, but my steps were steady. Inside, the room was warm with quiet conversation. People milled about with coffee cups, soft greetings, and eyes that carried stories too deep for words. There were grandmothers and teenagers, trauma counselors and wounded souls, husbands holding their wives' hands too tightly, and women sitting alone, fingers fidgeting in their laps. I scanned the crowd. A young man with nervous energy stood by the window, eyes darting. A grandmother held her granddaughter's hand, the girl clutching a notebook like a lifeline. Two women sat apart from the others, tension woven into every sideways glance. And a man with a cane rested against the wall, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. These were not just an audience. They were survivors, like me. I stepped onto the small platform and stood behind the podium. My hands found the edge, grounding me. On the screen behind me appeared the opening slide, my wedding photo, the caption that started it all, the words, "She's the real daughter." A breath caught in my throat, but I didn't let it stay there. I leaned into the discomfort. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice even, though quieter than I intended. "I'm not here today because I've healed completely. I'm here because I chose not to stay silent." And then I told them the truth. Not the headlines, not the viral speech, the real story, the quiet ache of being left out of family photos, the casual cruelty of being told I was too much, too loud, too emotional, the constant negotiation for affection, like love was a loan I had to repay with obedience. I didn't cry, but others did. Some nodded with tears streaming silently down their cheeks. Others looked away, jaws clenched. I could feel them listening, not just hearing, but recognizing. Afterward, as people milled around, someone approached me. She was older, with silver hair swept into a bun and eyes that saw deeper than most. "I just wanted to say," she said gently, "your story gave me permission to cry in front of my husband. I've been holding it in for years. I didn't know what to say at first. I simply placed my hand on hers. Thank you for letting it land here." That night, back in my hotel room, the city lights shimmered beyond the river. The room was still, almost sacred in its silence. I sank into the old chair by the window and opened my laptop. The document was still there, the wedding speech, unchanged, raw. I read every word. I let myself feel every bruise again, not to reopen the wound, but to honor it. At the very end of the document, I added one final line. "I still hope you're well, but I'm done hoping you'll see me." I stared at it for a long moment, then pressed save. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't an accusation, it was a release, a quiet benediction for the girl who once begged to be noticed. In the weeks that followed, the ripple of my story grew. News outlets ran the video, podcasts called, letters arrived from strangers. A counselor in Ohio wrote, "Your speech changed how I treat my own sister." Another said, "I showed your video to my teenage daughter, and we cried together for the first time in years." And then, inevitably, came the other news. Callista's brand had cracked. Not all at once, no public breakdown, but sponsors pulled out. Collaborators stepped away. Apologies filled her feed, but they rang hollow. The empire she'd built, on perfection and borrowed identity, crumbled under its own weight. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel vindicated. I simply watched, from a place of peace. Her fall wasn't my triumph. The wound she left wasn't healed by her downfall. That kind of pain becomes something else. It becomes a compass. She and my parents never reached out. No messages, no calls, no apologies. One evening, as twilight settled over the harbor, Arden brought me tea and sat beside me. The lights shimmered on the water. I placed my hand over his and looked into the calm of his face. They weren't my priority either, I said softly. He nodded. You always were mine. And in that stillness, I knew. Some wounds don't need to be closed to be understood. Some don't scar, they chart. And with each painful line, I had drawn a map. A map not to the past, but to the life I was finally choosing to live. Sometimes the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means learning to live without needing their approval. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would always be there? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life family stories. Your voice matters here. Let's talk in the comments below.